Hello there. How are you? Mama XOFO4, I think, was the first person on today. And I suppose that means you're a mama. X of 4. Can't work it out, but I'm not very good at that sort of thing. But thank you for coming. And thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Gildart, and I've been doing fireside readings of some of the classics, and I'm very glad you joined me. We're currently reading an old favorite of mine, The Inimitable Jeeves, which is written by P.G. Wodehouse. He wrote endless novels about Jeeves and Wooster, and they've been made into television shows and everything, and I love the TV shows that they make, and I love the books. So I decided to read The Inimitable Jeeves. And we are currently at chapter 6, and these are effectively short stories, but what has happened in this short story, if you missed it, if you do miss things, incidentally, you can always go to the Fireside Reading channel on YouTube and pick up everything that you might want to rewatch or watch anew. But what happened in chapter 5, and his stories are always so complicated, but interestingly, they're always roughly the same, is that Bingo Little, his good friend, is a tutor at a country house, and he has fallen in love with Honoria Glossop, who is the sister of the little boy that he's tutoring. And at the same time, Bertie's aunt has decided that Bertie needs to be married to Honoria Glossop. So she sends him to the same country house. At the country house, Bertie comes up with a scheme. Jeeves is away on holiday, so he can't help. Bertie has to come up with the scheme by himself. He decides he's going to push the young charge, the tutee of Bingo, whose name is Oswald. He's going to push Oswald into the lake. Then Bingo is going to be hiding behind a bush, going to run in and save Oswald, and Honoria will fall in love with him, thereby meaning that Bertie can't fall in love with Honoria because she will be already taken. Complicated. All right, so welcome to a fireside reading of The Inimitable Jeeves, chapter 6. The Hero's Reward. I don't know if you've noticed it, but it's rummy how nothing in this world ever seems to be absolutely perfect. The drawback to this otherwise singularly fruity binge was, of course, the fact that Jeeves wouldn't be on the spot to watch me in action. Still, apart from that, there wasn't a flaw. The beauty of the thing was, you see, that nothing could possibly go wrong. You know how it is, as a rule, when you want to get Chappie A on spot B at exactly the same moment when Chappie C is on spot D, there's always a chance of a hitch. Take the case of a general, I mean to say, who's planning out a big movement. He tells one regiment to capture the hill with the windmill on it at the exact moment when another regiment is taking the bridgehead or something down in the valley, and everything gets all messed up. And then, when they're chatting the thing over in camp that night, the colonel of the 1st Regiment says, "Oh, sorry, did you say the hill with the windmill? I thought you said the one with the flock of sheep." And there you are. But in this case, nothing like that could happen because Oswald and Bingo would be on the spot right along, so that all I had to worry about was getting Honoria there in due season. And I managed that all right, first shot, by asking her if she would come for a stroll in the grounds with me, as I had something particular to say to her. She had arrived shortly after lunch in the car with the Braithwaite girl. I was introduced to the latter, a tallish girl with blue eyes and fair hair. I rather took to her. She was so unlike Honoria, and if I'd been able to spare the time, I shouldn't have minded talking to her for a bit. But business was business. I had fixed it up with Bingo to be behind the bushes at 3 sharp, so I got hold of Honoria and steered her out through the grounds in the direction of the lake. "You're very quiet, Mr. Wooster," she said. Made me jump a bit. I was concentrating pretty tensely at the moment. We had just come in sight of the lake, and I was casting a keen eye over the ground to see that everything was in order. Everything appeared to be as arranged. The kid Oswald was hunched up on the bridge, and as Bingo wasn't visible, I took it that he had got into position. My watch made it 2 minutes after the hour. "Eh?" I said. Yes, I was just thinking." "You said you had something important to say to me." "Absolutely. I had decided to open the proceedings by sort of paving the way for young Bingo. I mean to say, without actually mentioning his name, I wanted to prepare the girl's mind for the fact that, surprising as it might seem, there was someone who had long loved her from afar and all that sort of rot. It's like this," I said. "It may sound rummy and all that, but there's somebody who's frightfully in love with you and so forth. A friend of mine, don't you know?" "Oh, a friend of yours?" "Yes." She gave me a kind of laugh. "Well, why doesn't he tell me so?" "Well, you see, that's the sort of chap he is. Kind of shrinking, diffident kind of fellow. Hasn't got the nerve. Thinks you so much above him, don't you know. Looks on you as a sort of goddess. Worships the ground you tread on, but can't whack up the ginger to tell you so." "This is very interesting." "Yes, he's not a bad chap, you know, in his way. Rather an ass, perhaps, but well-meaning. Well, that's the position. You might just bear it in mind. What?" "How funny you are." She chucked back her head and laughed with considerable vim. She had a penetrating sort of laugh, rather like a train going into a tunnel. It didn't sound over musical to me, and on the kid Oswald it appeared to jar not a little. He gazed at us with a good deal of dislike. "I wish the dickens you wouldn't make that row," he said, "scaring all the fish away." It broke the spell a bit. Honoria changed the subject. "I do wish Oswald wouldn't sit on the bridge like that," she said. "I'm sure it isn't safe. He might easily fall in." "I'll go and tell him," I said. I suppose the distance between the kid and me at this juncture was about 5 yards, but I got the impression that it was nearer 100. And as I started to toddle across the intervening space, I had a rummy feeling that I'd done this very thing before. Then I remembered, years ago at a country house party, I had been roped in to play the part of a butler in some amateur theatricals in aid of some ghastly charity or other, and I had had to open the proceedings by walking across the empty stage from left upper entrance and shoving a tray on a table down right. They had impressed it on me at rehearsals that I mustn't take the course at a quick heel and toe, like a chappie finishing strongly in a walking race, and as a result was that I kept the brakes on to such an extent that it seemed to me as if I was never going to get to the bally table at all. The stage seemed to stretch out in front of me like a trackless desert, and there was a kind of breathless hush, as if all nature had paused to concentrate its attention on me personally. Well, I felt just like that now. I had a kind of dry gulping in the throat, and the more I walked, the farther away the kid seemed to get, till suddenly I found myself standing just behind him without quite knowing how I'd got there. "Hello," I said, with a sickly sort of grin wasted on the kid because he didn't bother to turn round and look at me. He merely wiggled his left ear in a rather peevish manner. I don't know when I've met anybody in whose life I appeared to mean so little. "Hello," I said. "Fishing." I laid my hand in a sort of elder brotherly way on his shoulder. "Here, look out," said the kid, wobbling on his foundations. It was one of those things that want doing quickly or not at all. I shut my eyes and pushed. Something seemed to give. There was a scrambling sound, a kind of yelp, a scream in the offing, and a splash. And so the long day wore on, so to speak. I opened my eyes. The kid was just coming to the surface. "Help!" I shouted, cocking an eye on the bush from which young Bingo was scheduled to emerge. Nothing happened. Young Bingo didn't emerge to the slightest extent whatever. "I say, help!" I shouted again. Now, I don't want to bore you with reminiscences of my theatrical career, but I must just touch on once more on that appearance of mine as the butler. The scheme on that occasion had been that when I put the tray on the table, the heroine would come on and say a few words to get me off. Well, on the night, the misguided female forgot to stand by, and it was a full minute before the search party located her and shot her onto the stage. And all that time, I had to stand there waiting. A rotten sensation, believe me, and this was just the same, only worse. I understood what these writer chappies mean when they talk about time standing still. Meanwhile, the kid, Oswald, was presumably being cut off in his prime, and it began to seem to me that some sort of steps ought to be taken about it. What I had seen of the lad hadn't particularly endeared me to him, but it was undoubtedly a bit thick to let him pass away. I don't know when I've seen anything more grubby and unpleasant than the lake as viewed from the bridge, but the thing apparently had to be done. I chucked off my coat and vaulted over. It seems rummy that water should be so much wetter when you go into it with your clothes on than when you're just bathing, but take it from me that it is. I was only under there about 3 seconds, I suppose, but I came up feeling like the bodies you read of in the paper which had evidently been in the water several days. I felt clammy and bloated. At this point, the scenario struck another snag. I had assumed that directly I came to the surface, I should get hold of the kid and steer him courageously to shore. But he hadn't waited to be steered. When I had finished getting the water out of my eyes and had time to take a look around, I saw him about 10 yards away, going strongly and using, I think, the Australian crawl. The spectacle took all the heart out of me. I mean to say, the whole essence of a rescue, if you know what I mean, is that the party of the second part shall keep fairly still and in one spot. If he starts swimming off on his own account and can obviously give you at least 40 yards in the 100, where are you? The whole thing falls through. It didn't seem to me that there was much to be done except get ashore, so I got ashore. By the time I had landed, the kid was halfway to the house. Look at it from whatever angle you like, the thing was a washout. I was interrupted in my meditations by a noise like a Scotch express going under a bridge. It was Honoria Glossop laughing. She was standing at my elbow looking at me in a rummy manner. "Oh, Bertie, you are funny," she said. And even in that moment there seemed to be something sinister in the words. She had never called me anything except Mr. Wooster before. "How wet you are!" Yes, I am wet. You had better hurry into the house and change." "Yes." I wrung a gallon or two of water out of my clothes. "You are funny," she said again. "First proposing in that extraordinarily roundabout way, and then pushing poor little Oswald into the lake so as to impress me by saving him." I managed to get the water out of my throat sufficiently to try to correct this fearful impression. "No, no. He said you pushed him in, and I saw you do it. Oh, I'm not angry, Bertie. I think it was too sweet of you. But I'm quite sure it's time that I took you in hand. You certainly want someone to look after you. You've been seeing too many moving pictures. I suppose the next thing you would have done would have been to set the house on fire so as to rescue me." She looked at me in a proprietary sort of way. "I think," she said, "I shall be able to make something of you, Bertie. It is true yours has been a wasted life up to the present, but you are still young, and there is a lot of good in you." "No, really, there isn't." "Oh, yes, there is. It simply wants bringing out. Now, you run straight up to the house and change your wet clothes, or you will catch cold." And if you know what I mean, there was a sort of motherly note in her voice which seemed to tell me, even more than her actual words, that I was for it. As I was coming downstairs after changing, I ran into young Bingo, looking festive to a degree. "Bertie," he said, "just the man I wanted to see, Bertie. A wonderful thing has happened." "You blighter!" I cried. "What became of you? Do you know—" "Oh, you mean that thing about being in the bushes? I hadn't time to tell you about that. It's all off." "All off?" "Bertie, I was actually starting to hide in those bushes when the most extraordinary thing happened. Walking across the lawn, I saw the most radiant, the most beautiful girl in the world. There is none like her, none, Bertie. Do you believe in love at first sight? Do you believe in love at first sight? You do, don't you, Bertie, old man? Directly I saw her, she seemed to draw me like a magnet. I seemed to forget everything. We two were alone in a world of music and sunshine. I joined her. I got into conversation. She is a Miss Braithwaite, Bertie, Daphne Braithwaite. Directly our eyes met, I realized that what I had imagined to be my love for Honoria Glossop had been a mere passing whim. Bertie, you do believe in love at first sight, don't you? She is so wonderful, so sympathetic, like a tender goddess. At this point, I left the blighter. 2 days later, I got a letter from Jeeves. "The weather," it ended, "continues fine. I have had one exceedingly enjoyable bathe." I gave one of those hollow, mirthless laughs and went downstairs to join Honoria. I had an appointment with her in the drawing-room. She was going to read Ruskin to me. Chapter 7, introducing Claude and Eustace. The blow fell precisely at 1:45, summertime. Spencer, Aunt Agatha's butler, was offering me the fried potatoes at the moment, and such was my emotion that I lofted 6 of them onto the sideboard with the spoon, shaken to the core, if you know what I mean. Mark you, I was in a pretty enfeebled condition already. I had been engaged to Honoria Glossop nearly 2 weeks, and during all that time not a day had passed without her putting in some heavy work in the direction of what Aunt Agatha had called moulding me. I had read solid literature till my eyes bubbled. We had legged it together through miles of picture galleries, and I had been compelled to undergo classical concerts to an extent you wouldn't hardly believe. All in all, therefore, I was in no fit state to receive shocks, especially shocks like this. Honoria had lugged me round to lunch at Aunt Agatha's, and I had just been saying to myself, "Death, where is thy jolly old sting?" when she hove the bomb. "Bertie," she said suddenly, as if she had just remembered it, "what is the name of that man of yours, your valet?" "Eh? Oh, Jeeves. I think he's a bad influence on you," said Honoria. "When we are married, you must get rid of Jeeves." It was at this point that I jerked the spoon and sent 6 of the best, and Crispus sailing onto the sideboard with Spencer gambolling after them like a dignified old retriever. "Get rid of Jeeves?" I gasped. "Yes, I don't like him." "I don't like him," said Aunt Agatha. "But I can't. I mean, why, I couldn't carry on for a day without Jeeves." "You will have to," said Honoria. "I don't like him at all." "I don't like him at all," said Aunt Agatha. "I never did." Ghastly, what? I'd always had an idea that marriage was a bit of a washout, but I'd never dreamed that it demanded such frightful sacrifices from a fellow. I passed the rest of the meal in a sort of stupor. The scheme had been, if I remember, that after lunch I should go off and caddy for Honoria on a shopping tour down Regent Street. But when she got up and started collecting me and the rest of her things, Aunt Agatha stopped her. "You run along, dear," she said. "I want to say a few words to Bertie." So Honoria legged it, and Aunt Agatha drew up her chair and started in. "Bertie," she said, "dear Honoria does not know it, but a little difficulty has arisen about your marriage." "By Jove. Not really," I said, hope starting to dawn. "Oh, it's nothing at all, of course. It is only a little exasperating. The fact is, Sir Roderick is being rather troublesome. Thinks I'm not a good bet, wants to scratch the fixture. Well, perhaps he's right." "Pray do not be so absurd, Bertie. It is nothing so serious as that, but the nature of Sir Roderick's profession unfortunately makes him overcautious." I didn't get it. Overcautious? "Yes, I suppose it is inevitable. A nerve specialist with his extensive practice can hardly help taking a rather warped view of humanity." I got what she was driving at now. Sir Roderick Glossop, Honoria's father, is always called a nerve specialist because it sounds better, but everybody knows that he's really a sort of janitor to the loony bin. I mean to say, when your uncle the Duke begins to feel the strain a bit and you find him in the blue drawing room sticking straws in his hair, old Glossop is the first person you send for. He toddles round, gives the patient the once-over, talks about overexcited nervous systems and recommends complete rest and seclusion, and all that sort of thing. Practically every posh family in the country has called him in at one time or another, and I suppose that being in that position, I mean, constantly having to sit on other people's heads while their nearest and dearest phone to the asylum to send round the wagon, does tend to make a chappie take what you might call a warped view of humanity. "You mean he thinks I might be a loony, and he doesn't want a loony son-in-law," I said. Aunt Agatha seemed rather more peeved than otherwise at my ready intelligence. "Of course, he does not think anything so ridiculous. I told you he was simply exceedingly cautious. He wants to satisfy himself that you are perfectly normal." Here she paused, for Spencer had come in with a coffee. When he had gone, she went on, "He appears to have got hold of some extraordinary story about your having pushed his son, Oswald, into the lake at Ditteridge Hall. Incredible, of course. Even you would hardly do a thing like that." Well, I did sort of lean against him, and he shot off the bridge. Oswald definitely accuses you of having pushed him in the water. That has disturbed Sir Roderick, and unfortunately it has caused him to make inquiries, and he has heard about your poor Uncle Henry." She eyed me with a good deal of solemnity, and I took a grave sip of coffee. We were peeping into the family cupboard and having a look at the good old skeleton. My late Uncle Henry, you see, was by way of being the blot on the Worcester escutcheon. An extremely decent chappie personally, and one who had always endeared himself to me by tipping me with considerable lavishness when I was at school. But there's no doubt he did, at times, do rather rummy things, notably keeping 11 pet rabbits in his bedroom, and I suppose a purist might have considered him more or less off his onion. In fact, to be perfectly frank, he wound up his career, happy to the last and completely surrounded by rabbits, in some sort of a home. "It is very absurd, of course," continued Aunt Agatha, "if any of the family had inherited poor Henry's eccentricity, and it was nothing more, it would have been Claude and Eustace, and there could not be two brighter boys." Claude and Eustace were twins and had been kids at school with me in my last summer term. Casting my mind back, it seemed to me that bright just about described them. The whole of that term, as I remembered it, had been spent in getting them out of a series of frightful rows. "Look how well they are doing at Oxford. Your Aunt Emily had a letter from Claude only the other day saying that they hoped to be elected shortly to a very important college club called the Seekers." Seekers? I couldn't recall any club of the name in my time at Oxford. What do they seek? Claude did not say. Truth or knowledge, I should imagine. It is evidently a very desirable club to belong to, for Claude added that Lord Rainsby, the Earl of Datchet's son, was one of his fellow candidates. However, we are wandering from the point, which is that Sir Roderick wants to have a quiet talk with you alone. Now, I rely on you, Bertie, to be, I won't say intelligent, but at least sensible. Don't giggle nervously. Try to keep that horrible glassy expression out of your eye. Don't yawn or fidget. And remember that Sir Roderick is the president of the West London branch of the Anti-Gambling League, so please do not talk about horse racing. He will lunch with you at your flat tomorrow at 1:30. Please remember that he drinks no wine, strongly disapproves of smoking, and can only eat the simplest food owing to an impaired digestion. Do not offer him coffee, for he considers it the root of half the nerve trouble in the world. I should think a dog biscuit and a glass of water would about meet the case, what? Bertie! Oh, all right, merely persiflage. Now it is precisely that sort of idiotic remark that would be calculated to arouse Sir Roderick's worst suspicions. Do please try to refrain from any misguided flippancy when you're with him. He is a very serious-minded man. Are you going? Well, please remember all I have said. I rely on you, and if anything goes wrong, I shall never forgive you. Righto, I said, and so home with a jolly day to look forward to. I breakfasted late next morning and went for a stroll afterwards. It seemed to me that anything I could do to clear the old lemon ought to be done, and a bit of fresh air generally relieves that rather foggy feeling that comes over a fellow early in the day. I'd taken a stroll in the park and got back as far as Hyde Park Corner when some blighter sloshed me between the shoulder blades. It was young Eustace, my cousin. He was arm in arm with two other fellows, the one on the outside being my cousin Claude, and the one in the middle a pink-faced chappie with light hair and an apologetic sort of look. "Bertie, old egg," said young Eustace affably. "Hello," I said, not frightfully chirpily. "Fancy running into you. The The one man in London who can support us in the style we are accustomed to. By the way, you've never met old Dogface, have you? Dogface, this is my cousin Bertie. Lord Rainsby, Mr. Wooster. We've just been round to your flat, Bertie. Bitterly disappointed that you were out, but were hospitably entertained by old Jeeves. That man's a corker, Bertie. Stick with him. What are you doing in London? I asked. Oh, buzzing round. We're just up for the day. Flying visit, strictly unofficial. We oil back on the 3:10. And now, touching that lunch you very decently volunteered to stand us, which shall it be? The Ritz, the Savoy, the Carlton? Or if you're a member of Sarah's or the Embassy, that would do just as well. I can't give you any lunch. I've got an engagement myself. And by Jove, I said, taking a look at my watch, I'm late. I hailed a taxi. Sorry. As man to man, then, said Eustace. Lend us a fiver. I hadn't time to stop and argue. I unbelted the fiver and hopped into the cab. It was 20 to 2 when I got to the flat. I bounded into the sitting room, but it was empty. Jeeves shimmied in. Sir Roderick has not yet arrived, sir. Good egg, I said. I thought I should find him smashing up the furniture. My experience is that the less you want a fellow, the more punctual he's bound to be. And I had had a vision of the old lad pacing the rug in my sitting room, saying, "He cometh not," and generally hotting up. Is everything in order? I fancy you will find the arrangements quite satisfactory, sir. What are you giving us? Cold consommé, a cutlet, and a savoury, sir, with lemon squash, iced. Well, I don't see how that can hurt him. Don't go getting carried away by the excitement of the thing and start bringing in coffee. No, sir. And don't let your eyes get glassy, because if you do, you're apt to find yourself in a padded cell before you know where you are. Very good, sir. There was a ring at the bell. Stand by, Jeeves, I said. We're off. Thank you all for joining me. I hope this helps a little, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, same time and place, 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading, or check out the Fireside Reading channel on YouTube. Until then, please be very well. Good night.